Before the world knew empires of marble and iron, before the rise of Persia, before the legions of Rome, there was another age, an age older, harsher, and ruled not by distant kings, but by giants who walked the earth in gilded armor and drove thunder across the desert sands. In the 13th century BCE, two great powers towered above all others. To the south stood Egypt, restored from internal turmoil and reborn under the rule of a young pharaoh, Ramses II. To his people, he was more than a king. He was a symbol of rebirth, a warrior molded from divine lineage, determined to reclaim every inch of land once held by his predecessors. His throne was not merely inherited, it was a promise to restore Egypt's supremacy across the world. To the north lay the Hittite Empire, a formidable rival whose strength was forged in the mountains of Anatolia. Hardened warriors, master engineers, and tacticians who commanded alliances across vast territories. Their king, Muwatalli II, was a strategist of rare brilliance, calculating, patient, and unflinching. His armies were built on discipline and iron, his chariots heavier and deadlier than any in the known world. And between these two giants stood a single city, Kadesh. Small in size, immense in consequence. Whoever controlled Kadesh commanded the trade arteries of Syria, the crossroads of empires, and the pulse of power in the ancient Near East. For years, Egypt and Hatti maneuvered around each other like lions circling in the dust, each waiting for the moment the other would make a fatal mistake. Treaties were offered, then broken. Promises were made, then betrayed. Tension thickened the air like the heat of a coming storm. At last, in the 5th year of his reign, Pharaoh Ramses II made a decision that would ignite the world. He would march north to reclaim Kadesh, to restore Egyptian glory, to etch his name among the gods. But unseen beyond the horizon, Muwatalli had already set a trap with the precision of a master tactician. And Ramses was walking straight into it. This is the story of the Battle of Kadesh. Before the armies marched and the chariots thundered, the ancient Near East was a landscape balanced on the edge of contention. Kingdoms rose, alliances shifted, and empires clashed for dominance over lands that served as the arteries of ancient civilization. At the center of this world stood the regions of Canaan and Syria, fertile plains, fortified cities, and trade routes vital to every power that sought influence. Whoever controlled these lands did not merely claim territory, they commanded the pulse of an entire age. For generations, Egypt had been the dominant force in this region. The great pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, and others, had marched northward, conquering cities and binding local rulers to Egyptian authority. But as the years passed, Egypt's grip weakened. Internal upheaval, especially the religious revolution of the Amarna period, drew the empire's focus inward. Foreign territory slipped from control, vassals rebelled, trade routes faltered. And as Egypt withdrew, another power rose to fill the void. From the rugged mountains of Anatolia, the Hittite Empire expanded southward with calculated precision. Under kings like Suppiluliuma I, the Hittites dismantled the fading Mitanni kingdom and absorbed northern Syrian territories into their growing sphere. They forged alliances with cities desperate for protection, offering stability in exchange for loyalty. Carchemish, Aleppo, and countless smaller kingdoms pledged their allegiance to Hatti. In this shifting landscape, one fortified city became the ultimate prize, Kadesh. Perched along the Orontes River, Kadesh was more than a fortress. It was a strategic jewel. It controlled access to the trade routes that linked Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Egypt. Its location made it a gateway to the broader Levant, a symbol of influence and authority. Whoever held Kadesh wielded power far beyond its walls. And when Egypt lost it to the Hittites, the loss was felt not only in strategy, but in pride. Seti I, father of Ramses II, led a bold campaign to reclaim Kadesh, succeeding briefly. Egyptian banners once again flew over its battlements, yet the victory was ephemeral. As soon as Seti returned home, Hittite forces counterattacked with overwhelming strength, retaking the city and reinforcing their hold. The setback left a lingering scar in Egyptian memory. Kadesh became the frontier of humiliation, a reminder of lost dominance and a challenge waiting to be answered. By the time Ramses II ascended the throne, the rivalry between Egypt and Hittite had calcified into something deeper than territorial conflict. It was a struggle for supremacy, a contest between two empires that could not coexist in equal strength. Every northern Syrian city watched the unfolding tension with fear and opportunistic calculation. Align with Egypt and risk Hittite retaliation. Align with the Hittites and risk abandonment if Egypt returned stronger. Trade did not soften the rivalry. Diplomacy did not cool it. Each empire fortified its borders, expanded its armies, and waited for the inevitable. Letters preserved in ancient archives reveal the tone of the time: cold, cautious, and edged with accusation. Each side blamed the other for stirring rebellion. Each ruler demanded loyalty from the same contested cities, and each believed the land was rightfully theirs. Thus, the world before Kadesh was not shaped by a single spark, but by a long burning fire. Decades of tension, punctuated by brief wars and uneasy truces, created an atmosphere thick with distrust. Egypt sought to regain what once belonged to them. The Hittites sought to protect what they had earned through conquest. Kadesh, positioned at the heart of contested territory, became the symbol of everything each empire valued and everything each feared losing. By the 5th year of Ramses II's reign, the time for patience had ended. The pharaoh would march north. The Hittites would respond. And the world, already trembling beneath the weight of their growing rivalry, would soon witness a confrontation unlike anything it had seen before. Ramses II did not inherit an empire at its height. He inherited a throne recovering from turbulence. Egypt had weathered internal fractures, foreign encroachment, and the fading memory of past glory. Yet from the moment the young prince stepped into the world of command, it was clear he possessed a fire equal to the greatest rulers of Egypt's past. Born into the royal household, but raised amid the demands of a revitalizing kingdom, Ramses was shaped not by comfort, but by duty. His father, Seti I, was a formidable warrior king, a ruler who understood that Egypt's resurgence depended on strength, discipline, and decisive leadership. From Seti, the young Ramses learned the rhythm of military marches, the logic of strategy, and the weight of command. He accompanied generals on campaigns, observed negotiations with foreign rulers, and absorbed lessons about loyalty and empire. By adolescence, he was already trusted with responsibilities few princes his age had ever known. When Seti I died, the crown passed to Ramses, a young man, but one already seasoned in the realities of power. His coronation signaled hope for a renewed age. For the Egyptian people, he was not merely a ruler. He was a symbol of restoration, the heir who would mend old wounds and reclaim Egypt's place among the giants of the world. Ramses understood that to restore Egypt externally, he had to strengthen it internally. His earliest years as pharaoh focused not on monuments, but on rebuilding the foundation of military power. Egypt's army had suffered periods of neglect and instability. Ramses reorganized it with precision. He reinforced the infantry, restructured command systems, and placed loyal, proven officers in key positions. Most importantly, he revitalized the chariot corps, Egypt's elite strike force. These chariots, lightweight and agile, were the pride of Egyptian warfare. Ramses increased their numbers, refined their training, and ensured they were manned by seasoned veterans rather than inexperienced nobles. Under his direction, the army became not simply a tool of defense, but an extension of Egyptian will, a manifestation of power ready to project strength far beyond the Nile. But Ramses' ambitions extended far past military reform. He desired to restore territories once claimed by his grandfather's generation. The lands of Canaan and Syria still echoed with the memory of Egyptian dominance, an era when pharaohs commanded the allegiance of foreign kings and the treasures of distant lands flowed southward. Regaining those lands was not just politics, it was personal. Kadesh, in particular, burned in Egyptian memory as a symbol of loss, reclaimed briefly by Seti I and then snatched away by the Hittites. Ramses carried that legacy like a brand. The city represented unfinished business, an unhealed wound, and an opportunity to demonstrate the might of the reborn Egyptian state. If he could retake Kadesh, he would not only restore Egypt's influence, but carve his name into history. Early in his reign, Ramses began campaigns in Canaan, crushing rebellions, restoring vassal loyalties, and reminding distant rulers that Egypt had awakened. His victories were swift and theatrical. He marched at the head of his armies, projecting power with deliberate intention. Every success fed his growing reputation, as a commander, as a ruler, and as a figure believed to be favored by the gods. Egyptian inscriptions from his reign portray Ramses as nearly divine, a warrior chosen by Amun, a king whose strength was an extension of cosmic order. These depictions, though steeped in royal exaggeration, reflect a truth. Ramses believed in his destiny. He believed he was meant to reclaim Kadesh. And belief, in the ancient world, was often as powerful as the armies that marched behind it. Yet ambition is a double-edged blade. As Ramses prepared to claim what he saw as rightfully Egypt's, the Hittites prepared to defend what they had conquered. Muwatalli II watched Egypt's resurgence with keen eyes. He calculated the implications, weighed the risks, and understood what Ramses' northern campaigns foretold. A clash was not only possible, it was inevitable. And so, while Ramses marshaled his forces for a grand march, believing his destiny lay across the desert, another king, older, more seasoned, and no less ambitious, prepared quietly to meet him. The rise of Ramses II had set Egypt on the road to confrontation, and every step northward brought him closer to the battle that would define his reign. While Egypt gleamed beneath the sun, the Hittite Empire rose from a world far harsher. Its heartland was carved into the mountains and high plateaus of Anatolia, a land of stone citadels, cold winds, and terrain that demanded resilience. From these rugged foundations emerged an empire built not on splendor, but on discipline, strategy, and an unyielding will to survive. The ancient city of Hattusa, capital of Hatti, was a fortress of immense stone walls and monumental gates. It stood not as a symbol of luxury, but as a testament to endurance. Its archives contained tens of thousands of clay tablets, letters, treaties, legal codes, and military records, revealing a civilization that fought not only with weapons, but with diplomacy and cunning. The Hittites were masters of alliances, weaving a network of vassal states whose loyalty was secured through treaties, trade, marriages, and calculated power. Central to Hittite strength was their military innovation. Unlike Egypt, which favored swift, lightweight chariots designed for speed, the Hittites engineered heavier three-man chariots that functioned as mobile strike platforms. These chariots were the battering rams of the ancient battlefield, designed to break formations, crush infantry, and overwhelm lighter vehicles through sheer momentum. Combined with infantry from allied kingdoms across Syria and Anatolia, Hatti commanded one of the most diverse and powerful armies of the Late Bronze Age. By the time Ramses II ascended the Egyptian throne, the Hittite Empire had already taken firm control of northern Syria. Kingdoms like Aleppo, Carchemish, and Amurru pledged loyalty to Hatti. Each provided troops, resources, and critical intelligence about foreign movements. This alliance network gave the Hittites unparalleled reach. It also meant that when Egypt made a move, spies and messengers carried the news swiftly northward. Over this vast realm ruled Muwatalli II, the Hittite king who would confront Ramses at Kadesh. Muwatalli was a strategist to his core. He understood geopolitics with a clarity that few rulers possessed. To him, the battlefield was not merely a place of conflict, it was a board on which every move had consequences far beyond the clash of swords. He knew that Egypt's resurgence threatened the stability of Hittite influence in Syria. He knew Ramses would seek to reclaim Kadesh, and he knew that a defensive posture would not suffice. Muwatalli responded with meticulous planning. He repositioned his capital temporarily, moved troops southward, and summoned allies from across the empire. He prepared supply lines and established forward camps. He studied Ramses' movements, anticipated Egyptian routes, and ensured that the Hittite army would reach Kadesh long before the pharaoh expected. Where Ramses sought glory, Muwatalli sought advantage. For the Hittites, Kadesh was more than a strategic prize. It was the shield that protected their southern frontier. Losing it would invite rebellion among their Syrian vassals. Winning it would preserve decades of influence. As tensions with Egypt escalated, the importance of Kadesh grew until it represented the very balance of power between the two greatest empires of the age. Hattie's approach to conflict was grounded not only in military force, but in psychological warfare. Deception, misdirection, and surprise were tools as effective as iron and chariot wheels. When Egyptian scouts ventured into contested territory, Hittite spies watched them. When Ramses gathered intelligence, Muwatalli quietly manipulated what he received. The web of information that stretched across Syria belonged as much to Hattie as it did to Egypt. Thus, by the time Ramses marched north, believing his forces would seize Kadesh through speed and divine favor, the Hittites had already set the stage. Their armies were in position, their alliances secured, their king ready. The Hittite Empire had risen through resilience and calculation, and as Ramses marched toward Kadesh, Muwatalli II prepared not for a confrontation of equals, but for a victory he believed he had already engineered. The march to Kadesh began with confidence. Ramses II did not lead a hesitant force. He led an army reborn, tens of thousands strong, armed with new equipment, and driven by the belief that their pharaoh carried the will of the gods. As Egypt prepared to reclaim its place in Syria, the Nile Valley buzzed with anticipation. This would not be a mere expedition. This would be a statement to the world. Ramses divided his army into 4 great divisions: Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set, each one a potent military force capable of independent action. The Amun division marched at the front, personally commanded by Ramses. Behind them followed Ra, then Ptah, and finally the Set division far to the south. Their separation allowed for faster travel and better control of supplies, but it also created a vulnerability Ramses did not fully grasp. The army began its journey north through familiar lands, fortresses and towns that had long been under Egyptian influence. Local rulers greeted the pharaoh with offerings, reaffirming loyalty and ensuring the safe passage of the army. Morale soared as the divisions entered Canaan, their banners fluttering across plains once patrolled by earlier Egyptian kings. Every step reinforced Ramses' belief that his advance faced no serious resistance. But as Egypt's forces moved into the transitional lands between Canaan and Syria, the world around them changed. The loyalty of local rulers grew uncertain. Messengers disappeared. Travelers carried whispers of Hittite activity deeper within Syria. The closer Ramses came to Kadesh, the less reliable his information became. He believed he marched toward a city held by a moderate Hittite garrison. Nothing his army could not quickly overpower. The truth was far more dangerous. For while Ramses' scouts reported little enemy presence ahead, Hittite spies watched every step of the Egyptian march. The network Muwatalli II had woven across the Levant carried intelligence southward with breathtaking efficiency. Every movement of Egypt's army, every city they passed, every division's positioning, Hattie knew it all. And Muwatalli used this knowledge to prepare a trap so precise it would nearly end Egypt's campaign before the battle even began. As Ramses approached Kadesh, he received the information that would shape the catastrophe to come. 2 men, claiming to have deserted the Hittite army, were captured by Egyptian scouts. Trembling and desperate, they told Ramses that Muwatalli's forces were far to the north, unprepared, days away from Kadesh. It was exactly the news Ramses wanted to hear. Confident he had reached the city first, the pharaoh quickened his advance, eager to begin preparations for siege. But these men were not deserters. They were Hittite operatives, deliberately sent to mislead him. Their testimony, delivered with rehearsed fear, convinced Ramses he held the advantage. He believed his forces would encircle Kadesh before the Hittites could assemble. In reality, Muwatalli had already moved his army south, quietly, swiftly, and with overwhelming numbers. The Ammon division reached the plains near Kadesh first, setting camp along the Orontes River. Ramses prepared for a siege, unaware that the Ra division had marched too far behind and would soon unknowingly walk into danger. The pharaoh sent scouts to confirm the absence of Hittite forces, but the region's terrain and the enemy's careful concealment prevented them from discovering the truth. The illusion shattered only when 2 more men were captured. This time, genuine Hittite soldiers fleeing in terror. Their story contradicted everything the deserters had claimed. Muwatalli was not to the north. He was here, with an army far larger than Ramses had anticipated, and he had positioned them behind Kadesh, hidden from Egyptian view, ready to strike. The revelation struck like lightning. Ramses suddenly saw the peril he had marched into. The divisions were too far apart. The Ammon division was isolated. The Ra division still marched into what they believed was open territory. And behind the city's walls, where Ramses expected uncertainty, lay the deadliest chariot force in the ancient world, waiting for the signal to attack. In that moment, the pharaoh understood the truth. The road to Kadesh had not been a path toward victory, but a march into a trap from which survival would demand everything he and his army possessed. The plains around Kadesh were quiet, too quiet. Ramses II stood at the center of his camp, believing he was preparing for a siege. His soldiers erected tents, unloaded supplies, and organized their positions. Yet beneath that surface calm lay the shadow of catastrophe. The revelation from the captured Hittite soldiers tore away the illusion of safety. The enemy was not far away. The enemy was here, and the enemy was ready. What Ramses could not see, what no Egyptian scout had detected, was the massive army concealed behind the city's walls and ridges. Muwatalli II had arrived with not only his own forces, but with warriors from allied kingdoms across Anatolia and Syria. Tens of thousands waited in silence. Among them stood the heart of the Hittite war machine, 3,000 heavy chariots, each carrying a crew of 3 and built to crush anything in their path. While Ramses struggled to regroup his thoughts, Muwatalli already knew the time had come. The trap had been set. The pharaoh had marched willingly into it, and now the Hittite king would spring it with devastating force. At Muwatalli's command, the Hittite chariot corps surged forward. What began as a rumble became a thunder, rolling across the plain like a storm of hooves and wheels. The dust rose in a great plume. The ground trembled, the air filled with the roar of warriors shouting in unison. It was not simply a charge, it was the eruption of an army that had waited patiently for the perfect moment. Their target was the Ra division, still marching, still unprepared, still unaware of the enemy hidden just beyond the horizon. The Ra division advanced in long, stretched-out columns. They expected to link with Ramses at the camp. They expected calm. Instead, they met devastation. The Hittite chariots slammed into the Ra division with ferocity unmatched in the ancient world. Infantrymen scattered in every direction, their formation torn apart before they even understood what they faced. Horses trampled soldiers who had no time to draw their weapons. Officers tried to rally their men, but their shouts vanished beneath the crashing wheels and the screams of the dying. What began as a marching column collapsed into pure chaos. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers were thrown into panic. Some fled toward the river, others ran blindly toward the Ammon camp. The Hittite chariots plowed through everything in their path, splitting the Egyptian division apart and leaving only wreckage behind. To the warriors of Hatti, it was the perfect execution of a carefully constructed blow. By the time the survivors reached Ramses' encampment, they brought with them terror that spread faster than orders could contain it. The Ammon division, momentarily calm, erupted into confusion. Soldiers grabbed weapons, shouting conflicting reports. Ramses himself quickly recognized the scale of disaster. The Ra division was destroyed, the Hittites were in full charge, and his own division was the next target. The Hittites did not stop. Their wave of chariots turned toward the Ammon camp, crashing into the outskirts with unstoppable momentum. Tents collapsed, supplies shattered under hooves. Horses bolted wildly, dragging splintered wood behind them. Egyptian soldiers scrambled into defensive pockets, some cut down before they even reached their weapons. The battlefield had transformed into a storm, violent, disordered, deadly. Ramses found himself surrounded by chaos so complete that even the mightiest army would struggle to withstand it. The pharaoh, accustomed to standing in control, now faced the real possibility of annihilation. Yet the Hittite onslaught carried a flaw that only a trained commander could detect amid the chaos. Their chariots, built for speed in open terrain, were now tangled in the dense, uneven landscape of the Egyptian camp. The very momentum that allowed them to obliterate the Ra division now pushed them too far, too fast. Their formation, so powerful at the moment of impact, stretched thin as they drove deeper into a battlefield that offered no space for maneuver. Chariots overturned as wheels struck tents or supply crates. Horses stumbled in the confusion. Warriors fell as they attempted to adjust their positions. The crushing wave of the ambush began to lose shape, turning from a coordinated strike into a scattered assault. Ramses recognized the shift instantly. He saw the vulnerability that lay hidden within the fury of the attack. But even with the enemy's formation weakening, the danger remained overwhelming. His forces were scattered, his divisions isolated, and the Hittites still outnumbered him. Across the field, the Hittite king observed from a distance. Muwatalli had executed his plan flawlessly. He believed the battle was already his. He believed Egypt would fall before the sun began to set. But he had underestimated one thing: the will of a pharaoh who refused to die on his knees. As the chariots churned through the camp, as the dust and noise swallowed every trace of order, Ramses prepared to answer the storm. The ambush had nearly broken Egypt, and yet, in this moment of destruction, a counterstrike was about to ignite, one driven not by numbers or strategy alone, but by the relentless defiance of a king standing at the edge of ruin. The trap had been sprung, but the battle for Kadesh was far from decided. For a moment, it seemed Egypt stood on the brink of collapse. The Ra division lay shattered behind the charging wall of Hittite chariots. The Ammon camp, once a place of preparation, had transformed into a vortex of panic. Soldiers scattered in every direction, shouting warnings drowned beneath the relentless thunder of hooves and wheels. Dust swallowed the sunlight. Confusion choked every breath. And at the center of this storm stood Ramses II, staring into the jaws of annihilation. But the pharaoh did not surrender to fear. He saw the destruction around him, heard the cries of his men, felt the ground tremble beneath the Hittite assault, and he answered not with despair, but with defiance. In that instant, Ramses became something far more than a king. He became the anchor around which Egypt would either survive or be destroyed. With a determination that cut through the chaos, Ramses mounted his chariot. His armor, coated in dust, caught the faint light that pierced the storm. He gripped his bow, steadied his team of horses, and drove straight toward the heart of the collapsing battle. To his soldiers, the sight was electrifying. Their king, alone, almost engulfed, charging toward the enemy rather than away from it. The inscriptions that later celebrated his deeds may exaggerate the details, but one truth stands unbroken. Ramses led from the front. When his army faltered, he stepped into the gap. When fear threatened to consume them, he became the flame that pushed it back. As the pharaoh surged across the battlefield, he rallied scattered fighters, shouting above the noise, commanding them to stand and fight. His voice, sharp, unwavering, cut through the panic. Pockets of Egyptian soldiers began to gather around him, forming small but resolute clusters that resisted the chariot onslaught. Archers steadied their bowstrings. Spearmen locked shields and braced themselves. Officers regained their footing and began redirecting their units. Slowly, the tide of chaos began to harden into defiance. But courage alone was not enough. Ramses recognized something critical. The Hittites had overextended themselves. Their chariot corps, so lethal in the open field, was now snarled within the dense layout of the Egyptian camp. Tents, supply crates, uneven terrain. These obstacles disrupted the precision of their formations. In their furious push to crush the Egyptians, the chariots had driven too deep, their lines stretched thin, their momentum fractured. This was the moment Ramses needed. He ordered the remaining Egyptian charioteers to regroup behind him. The formation was hasty, imperfect, forged in desperation, but it was enough. With the pharaoh at its point, the Egyptian chariot counterattack surged forward. The clash was immediate and brutal. Light Egyptian chariots darted between obstacles, delivering strikes before pulling away. Hittite chariots, heavier and less maneuverable, became trapped amid the debris of the shattered camp. Egyptian archers on foot joined the counterstrike, firing into the densest pockets of enemy units. Spears found their marks as soldiers coordinated with the chariot's movements. And all the while, Ramses cut a path across the battlefield, his chariot wheels carving furrows in the dust, his bow sending arrows into the charging mass. The impact was unmistakable. The relentless Hittite surge faltered. Their lines wavered. Some chariots overturned under the pressure. Others attempted to retreat to regain formation. For the first time since the ambush began, the Hittites encountered resistance strong enough to halt their momentum. Muwatalli's perfect trap had not broken Egypt. It had awakened its king. Egyptian survivors, once fleeing in terror, now pushed forward with renewed strength. The battered Amun division, reformed around their pharaoh, delivered coordinated strikes that broke into the weakened Hittite positions. The field, moments earlier dominated by the enemy, now shifted into a brutal, grinding struggle for control. Ramses' counterstrike did not grant him victory, but it prevented annihilation. It transformed what should have been a catastrophic defeat into a precarious stalemate. And most importantly, it bought time. Time for survivors to rally. Time for formations to rebuild. Time for fate to intervene. Because beyond the horizon, unseen by both armies, reinforcements were on their way. Forces that would arrive at the moment Egypt needed them most. The pharaoh had held the line, but the Battle of Kadesh was about to take another dramatic turn. For a moment, the battlefield stood suspended between collapse and survival. Ramses had carved out a fragile pocket of stability, but the situation remained dire. The Hittite chariots, though battered by the pharaoh's counterattack, still held overwhelming numbers. And around the Amun division, the remnants of the Ra division lay scattered, worn, wounded, exhausted. Ramses knew that even the fiercest resistance could not withstand the Hittites forever. His forces were isolated. The Ptah and Set divisions were still miles to the south. Muwatalli, watching from across the Orontes, prepared to send infantry reserves to finish the job. Egypt had fought bravely, but bravery alone could not hold back a force built to crush armies. Then, from beyond the southern ridges, a distant sound rose, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the echo of battle. Hooves, wheels, marching feet. It grew louder, clearer, unmistakable, a force approaching at speed. Ramses turned toward the sound, and hope returned. The narration had arrived. The narration were a specialized Egyptian contingent, elite troops, possibly mercenaries or vassal forces, positioned earlier along the route to provide support when needed. Their origins remain debated by historians, but their impact at Kadesh is undeniable. They arrived precisely when the pharaoh stood at the edge of defeat. Charging onto the battlefield from the south, the narration struck the flank of the Hittite chariot forces with explosive force. The timing was perfect. The Hittites, already extended deep into the Egyptian camp, suddenly found themselves assaulted from a direction they had not prepared for. Their chariots, struggling to regain formation after Ramses' counterattack, now faced a fresh wave of determined fighters. The impact was immediate. Where moments earlier the Egyptians had fought to survive, now the Hittites scrambled to contain the new threat. The narration pushed forward with disciplined aggression, carving through the loose edges of the Hittite lines. Egyptian morale surged. Soldiers who had fought with desperation now fought with renewed purpose. The battlefield's momentum, once entirely in Hittite favor, began to tilt. Muwatalli II realized the danger. His perfect ambush had been disrupted by a force he had failed to anticipate. He responded with urgency, sending infantry reserves toward the river to reinforce the chariot corps. But the soldiers had to cross difficult terrain, slowing their approach. Each passing moment allowed Egypt to stabilize further. Ramses seized the opportunity. He reorganized the Amun division's survivors, directing them to coordinate with the narration. Archers targeted chariot hubs, spearmen held choke points, charioteers attacked openings created by the new arrivals. The field, once a chaotic tangle of destruction, began to form recognizable lines again. The Hittites, though still formidable, lost the crushing advantage they had held at the start of the ambush. Their charge had been too deep, their formation too stretched, their momentum too fractured. Now they found themselves entangled in a bitter struggle, pressed from two sides, fighting not a broken army, but a revived one. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the truth became clear: Kadesh would not fall today. Neither army would claim the decisive victory they had sought. The tide had turned. Not through overwhelming force, but through endurance, timing, and the resilience of soldiers who refused to die on foreign soil. The Hittite ambush had failed to deliver the killing blow. And now, as the day dimmed, both sides prepared for what the fading light would bring, an ending forged not by triumph, but by survival. When the sun finally sank behind the hills of Kadesh, silence settled over a battlefield that had once shaken with the fury of thousands. The thunder of chariots, the screams of warriors, the clash of bronze, everything faded into a haunting stillness. Across the plain lay the scars of war, shattered wheels, fallen horses, discarded shields, and the motionless forms of men who had given everything for empires that would claim victory from the ashes. Ramses II gathered the remnants of his army near the river. He had survived the most devastating ambush Egypt had ever faced, but the cost was staggering. The Ra division had been torn apart. The Amun division, though steadied by the pharaoh's leadership, bore deep wounds. Exhaustion and disbelief spread through the ranks as soldiers tended to the injured and searched for comrades who would never rise again. Across the water, Muwatalli II surveyed his own losses. His mighty chariot corps, the weapon intended to break Egypt forever, had been battered into disarray. Warriors from far-flung vassal states lay among the wreckage, their sacrifice heavy upon the Hittite king's ambitions. Though his trap had struck with near-perfect precision, it had not destroyed the Egyptian army. Ramses still lived. Egypt still stood. As night darkened the field, both sides withdrew. No side advanced. No final clash followed. The will for further bloodshed evaporated, replaced by the grim acceptance that neither could force a decisive end. In the cold light of dawn, the Hittites chose not to renew the attack. And Ramses, far from Egyptian strongholds and facing a still formidable enemy, began the march back south. Both rulers would carve inscriptions proclaiming victory. Both would present the battle as a triumph of their own strength. Yet the truth lingered unspoken. Kadesh had no victor, only survivors. But the story of Kadesh did not end in retreat. Its legacy lived on, not through conquest, but through consequence. In the years that followed, both empires recognized the cost of their near ruin. Each rebuilt, maneuvered politically, and measured the weight of renewed conflict. Neither Egypt nor Hatti could afford another clash of such magnitude. 16 years after the battle, a moment without precedent unfolded. Under Ramses II and Hattusili III, successor to Muwatalli, the two powers crafted a treaty that would reshape diplomacy across the ancient world. Written in Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform, the agreement declared peace, mutual defense, extradition rights, and a promise that neither empire would violate the other's borders. This document, still preserved today in temples and tablets, stands as the oldest known surviving international peace treaty. Born not from triumph, but from the brutal stalemate at Kadesh, it signaled a rare truth. Even the mightiest empires must sometimes choose coexistence over conquest. The legacy of Kadesh is not a story of victory. It is a story of endurance, diplomacy, and the recognition that even the greatest empires must sometimes choose peace over power. The world remembers the Battle of Kadesh not for who won it, but for the peace that followed.